But although the brain is one homogeneous mass, a 3-pound gelatinous mass in your brain, you could actually put your hand in and you wouldn't feel anything because there's no pain receptors in the brain. We don't do that, but by analogy. So when things are happening to the brain substance itself, it gives off no pain sensation. So your body doesn't know things are happening there. So like a heart attack, when you have lack of blood flow to the heart, you get a lot of pain there because the lack of oxygen creates chemicals that signal pain receptors, and your brain says there's something wrong. And that pain we usually deal with morphine, but the brain, when there's no blood flow to some of the areas of the brain, there are no pain receptors there to signal the body that something's wrong. We're kind of blind to it, not only externally from medical devices and tools to see in technology adversity here from ischemia or lack of blood flow and oxygen, but also your body is unknowing that this is actually going on, so you have no idea that you're actually having a lack of oxygen to the brain when this actually happens. When these vessels are blocked off at the end vascular territories in adults, it creates something called a thalamic pain syndrome, or it's also called a central pain syndrome. And unfortunately, in the thalamus, all the gating mechanisms are translating sensory input to the upper parts of the brain to make sense of what you hear and see and feel is processed through here. And because these end vascular territories in the thalamus, when these vessels get blocked off, they're by sludge from mast and zeta, vaccines, toxins, heavy metals, infectious diseases, or embolic strokes, chunks coming off the carotids in an adult. But after this happens, then the sensory perception in the brain changes relative to light touch. Things the body used to perceive as being pleasurable. If I was to rub your skin, hug you, touch you, we tend to do that as consoling as one human being to another, thinking that we're doing something pleasurable for a person that we see in distress. Unfortunately, when these areas become ischemic in subtle ways that we cannot appreciate, touching the skin becomes very, very painful to perception of the brain. Searing pain, burning, lancinating pain, and the whole sensory apparatus has changed. So that we see in adults. Now, when it happens in children, especially in infants, they're premotor, they're pre-verbal, they've just arrived on this planet, and they're trying to decipher what this world is all about. When you hit these areas by sludging the brain with mast and zeta, and there's no oxygen in these areas, and they have ischemic damage there, touching their skin, hugging them, rubbing them, putting clothes on their body that becomes noxious is distressing to them. And sometimes after vaccination, you find children are inconsolable. Infants are inconsolable. They're bicycling their feet in their cribs. They can't seem to settle. And they're in distress and they're crying a lot, and we call them difficult babies. And we always thought historically that, children who are autistic are asocial. They have some lack of desire for cuddling or being close to other human beings, because when we hug them or hold them, they go limp and go backwards like this. And we thought there's something being damaged to the brain to affect sociability. But if you look at this slide here, this is a young child from the 1964 rubella birth defect. The neurologist back here in this time who saw this child, Dr. Meeker of Port Arthur in Texas, he looked at this child, and this picture is of this child. This child actually wore out the hair in the back of his head as he ambulated across the floor in this very unusual posture. If you look at his feet very carefully, the feet are everted out so that the soles of the feet are not touching the ground. His arms are being held up off the body in a very specific way. And again, his arms are not touching his skin. These arches hold back up off the ground as well. And again, if you look at it from the perspective of he's got a thalamic pain syndrome from the sludging of the blood, this infant is doing everything he can to decrease the number of stimulation to his skin for a reason. We don't know what that reason is, and the doctors back then thought there was something unusual with his neurological system. The virus and the infectious disease messed that up. But when the child could actually ambulate across the floor in this position and coordinated way pass objects from one hand to the other back and forth in this posture, that tells us something completely different. Looking at it now from our understanding of the process causing these neurodevelopmental disorders, this child, like the autistic children, has had damage to the small vessels, go into the thalamus, and actually now when they get sensations in the body that would normally we think be pleasurable is causing them enormous pain. The children just want to do things to get rid of it. They can start walking on their toes to decrease the sensory stimulation of the back of the feet. They may not be able to tell you why, and they might rip their clothes off, and that's not social deviance. even the clothing touching the skin, even though it's not causing searing pain as they get older, it's distracting because the pathways in the thalamus responsible for gating these information coming out, anything the children can do to decrease the amount of information coming overload to the brain, they will do. And unfortunately, when these areas have been damaged, even though they're no longer painful anymore as they grow up and get older, these things can still be distracting for them, and they just rip the clothes.